to try to show you how I just put together a little test MCP. So right here we have Claude Desktop, and in Claude Desktop I added this prompt: create a workflow that shows a contact form and then emails the results to me using a Gmail node. Use your MCP tool to create the workflow directly in n8n. I like adding that. You don't really need to. And it went through and it processed that, and it generated a workflow right here. So you can see there's a, wrong way. There we go. You can see it created a JSON workflow called contact form to email, and it generated the nodes and everything else. But then it said, perfect, I've successfully created the contact form in your n8n instance. Here's what we created. And it describes the whole workflow. What it does, how it's set up, how to set it up, because I have to create some credentials and so on for it. Now, I can extend this to create credentials as well. I just haven't done that yet. That's it. So it actually created the workflow. And this is the actual workflow it created in that run. And I'm going to show you a little bit more of how it does it. But you can see it created a fully formed. It actually filled out fields in here. You got a name field and a placeholder and email and so on. So it created a full form. And then it processed the form to a Gmail node. And if you go in here, you set up the full contact, HTML message to send me and all the information, but it doesn't have my email yet. So I got to put that in. I could have specified that when I did the prompt. I just didn't do that. And it's defaulting to my credentials that I already have set up, which is just a coincidence. It wouldn't normally do that if you didn't have any already. It's to set up the credentials. Now, the way this works is actually pretty simple. It's got this trigger, an MCP server trigger, and the MCP server trigger has tools. What happens is the MCP server trigger has a test URL and a production URL. When you're in an active mode, it's using the production one, and when it's test, it's using the test. And I gave it a path of n8n-mcp, so the full path ends with mcp-mcp at the very end. Now, notice though that the production URL is different than the test, so you got to know which one to use. So if you're just doing a quick test, you can use test, otherwise use production. When this gets called by an MCP client, in this case I'm using Claude, it needs to pass in a object which represents the JSON workflow. And then what's going to happen is this is actually a tool that calls other n8n workflows. So workflow here is going to get called because in here I said call the workflow called create workflow MCP, which by the way is this one right here. So it's calling itself, and then it's calling this trigger that gets called when executed by another workflow. So this is just circular. We call the MCP server from Claude. It's going to call its tool that calls a workflow. This is the sub workflow. And so what it's going to do is the MCP request is going to pass in an object, in this case, a workflow object. So the one field we take is a workflow of type object. And here's what we got. We got, I should fix that. But so this is contact form to email, which is exactly what Claude created. And so the Claude passed this over. And then that calls an n8n node called create a workflow. And this has an API key to my current instance of n8n. And then the resource I want to create is a workflow. It creates the workflow and it passes the workflow in. And I just say to JSON string to change it from an object to a string. And then it does it. And so what you get out of all of this is this, and that's it.